Hey everybody, it's Chris Kirkpatrick, and welcome back to Life 180. And I am here for the weekly segment that we have going now with Galen Nuttall up in Canada. And so I'm really excited about today's video. If you've been watching this channel, you know I love to do a lot of technical stuff on how-tos, how to structure a whole life policy. And I think we've gotten a lot of positive feedback from people about the transparency of those videos, because there's not a lot of people out there putting out content that is actually showing you exactly what to do and kind of like things to take into consideration for your personal situation or circumstances. And so the goal from this video, just kind of getting into it, is there's a lot of information. We've done a lot of great content in the United States for this, but I know that there's a lot of Canadians who are out there who are, potentially thinking about getting a policy right now. And the reality is these things change all the time. If there's a video that you see from 5 years ago, it may be pretty close to accurate, but a lot of these regulations and policy structures and designs change year to year to year. And so the nuances can be a little different. And if you're looking at potentially getting started with a policy in 2021, the purpose of this video is to kind of walk through some of those nuances and walk through the elements that you should be considering and kind of contemplating about, do they meet your objectives? Do they not? And understanding kind of all the moving parts behind it. So with that said, Galen, welcome. What's going on, man?
Hey man, thanks for having me on again. This is awesome. And yeah, I was looking through your videos and seeing questions people had and how, there's quite a few people saying, well, is there a difference between US and Canada? We can talk about that a bit. And absolutely, these things change all the time. Some big changes every once in a while, and then minor changes like more frequently.
Yeah.
And what I will say though is, so 2017, there was one big change around these types of policies. And at first everyone was freaking out because they're like, oh, they're not going to be as good. But in the end, what the companies did was they responded to it by actually making them far more flexible than they'd been in the past. So it's overall good news, actually, for someone who's getting a policy now, is that they're, in all likelihood, if they're talking to the right kind of advisor, it's someone who's going to make it far more flexible than it was at one point in time. And we can dive into that a bit.
Nice. That's awesome. So kind of get me started on this. Like, I know we were just kind of talking before we got started on this, on the differences between policies in the United States, policies in Canada, and whatnot. And I think that's going to be a video for another day overall, because that's a lot of information. But what's going on in Canada right now? Like what are the, walk me through if you're looking to get a policy this year, and you want to utilize it for an infinite banking strategy, or if you want to utilize it for an estate preservation strategy, or there's a million different ways and reasons you would want to get a whole life policy. Kind of walk me through like the questions that you think people should be asking themselves, and to figure out, like, is this policy first and foremost concept meeting my objectives, and then is this policy structure meeting my objectives, and is ultimately this strategy getting me closer to my ultimate goal, right? Like, because that's the way I look at it, is like, nobody should be buying anything, any financial product, nobody should be investing in any account unless they really truly fully understand, okay, where do I want to go? What are my objectives? What are my real goals that I want to achieve in life? And is this action, is this investment, is this product going to get me closer to my goal? And if the answer is no, then what the heck are you doing, right? And like, so that's just kind of how I look at everything in life, whether it's business, whether it's investing, whether it's your marriage, whether it's, you as a parent, like that. I feel like that's kind of a missing train of thought for a lot of people. And so can we kind of attack it from that angle?
Absolutely, because it's funny, we weren't even talking about this before, but I love this approach because I kind of joke. So I'm in a lot of Facebook groups where people are talking about different ways of investing, and whether it be real estate or index funds or whatever, or infinite banking or whole life.
Yeah.
And I always joke, like, I'm a lot of fun at parties guy, because people will go in there and they'll ask a question. And my job as an advisor, I'd say one of the number one job that I have in my client's life as a financial planner is to help them ask the right questions. Because if all you read are books and all you do is read blogs and you're going to end up asking the same questions that everyone else is asking. And a lot of times they are on what I call like a low level of question. And so to me, there's three different levels of planning. Every level is important, but the order in which someone does them is far more important. And the analogy I use is it's kind of like dirt, rain, and sun. Like to grow a tree, you need good soil, you need rain, and you need the sun. And like, but like the dirt, if all you do is talk about dirt and like that's all you talk about, like you're kind of like in the mud. And so what I'll say is that is like when it's a purely product conversation and it stays and ends at the level of product, I
Yeah.
find that to be a very low level conversation. So when I get in these groups and people say, should I buy this index fund or that index fund? I will encourage them to step outside of that question, above that question, and say, well, what is the end goal of this question? Because people can get stuck in that loop forever of, did I get the one that got 8.5%, or did I get the one that got 8.25, or is the fee this, or is the fee that? And it's funny because in a lot of these groups, when someone asks a low level question and I encourage them to ask a higher level question, a lot of times they don't actually like it, to be honest, because that's not what they're there for. They're there, but they just want a quick answer.
Yeah.
And especially in the investing world, I joke about it. I'm like, when I was a kid, I used to watch raindrops go down the window, and like while I was driving, while my parents were driving, and I'd place internal bets on which raindrop was going to get to the bottom faster. Like that's what that conversation is should I bet on raindrop A or raindrop B? And I'm like, what does it matter? So I encourage people then to do like the question that is a higher level is strategy. Like product is here. It's kind of like the dirt. You can get stuck in the dirt forever, never get out of it. The rain is kind of like the strategy. Like, all right, like what is a higher level of, not only is there a product, so let's just use an example, an investment. Okay, should that investment be inside of my TFSA, my RRSP, my corporation, outside of my corporation? Like that's the strategy.
Yep.
So that's a higher level. And then the ultimate level is the sun, which I say is the purpose. What is the final purpose of all this? Is it going to make me sleep better at night? Is it going to make me feel more at peace with my money? Is it going to make me, feel like I'm reaching a goal? And so my job as an advisor is to meet people in any different stage. And I rarely ever meet anyone who's coming to me at the level of purpose. It's usually at the level of product. And my job is to elevate them to the level of purpose and then work our way back down.
Okay.
Like, what's the ultimate purpose? Cool. What's the strategy? What's the product? And then once we know the purpose and the final goal and the reasons behind it, then it's kind of easy to do the rest. Like I can sit there and I can crunch all the numbers and I can figure out exactly what they should be doing.
That's awesome. Well, so let's get into that then. So let's come at it from the perspective of infant banking. And it's funny, I just had a conversation with a woman who called me, and this is a little unrelated to what we're talking about, but I think it's also very related in a sense that, she calls me up. I literally got off the phone with her 3 minutes before we started doing the Zoom. And, she had a contract with a company called Midland here in the United States. And it was a UL contract, and it was 3 years old. And so she was talking about, she was getting approached by a Northwestern Mutual agent. And, it's just funny because like this Northwestern Mutual agent's telling her she should 1035 exchange, which is, the tax benefit way of beneficial way of converting money from one policy to another in the United States. 1035 exchange it into this new policy with Northwestern Mutual, and all will be right in the world and her life will be great. And then so I said, well, how much do you have? Like what's your account look like? And so she had her policy, and she's like, the in-force illustration, she had no cash value yet in her policy. And I'm like, so that's a problem. First of all, like when you were like, what was your objective when you bought this policy? Like, because it doesn't mean it's bad. It's just, what's your objective? If your objective was estate planning, insurance, guaranteed universal life, if maybe she didn't understand it was a GUL policy, maybe, the person who designed it had like a different mindset. And so like, I don't want to come right out and criticize like this policy sucks, right? Because it may have been built with a different specific intent, right? Like, so that comes back to the point where I was like, so what was your objective with this thing? And she's like, well, for investments, I want to buy real estate with it. And I'm like, you're in a whole lot of trouble, like either you didn't think of the right questions to ask yourself, you weren't able to communicate what you really wanted effectively to them, and probably all three, you didn't understand the nuances of policy design, the different product options, and how to structure it and what to ask for. So basically you got taken advantage of. Like, ultimately that's what happens. And quite frankly, that's why the insurance industry has such a bad rap. because there are a lot of people out there, because the guy who sold her that policy probably made, 100 to 150% more money in commission selling it the way he did versus the way that she needed it and wanted it.
Yeah.
You know?
For sure. And I mean, I call that drive-through advice. Like up here in Canada, we have Tim Hortons coffee, and a popular version of that is a double-double. So it's 2 cream, 2 sugar. And so I call it double-double advice. Someone who pulls up and says, hey, I want a double-double, and they just hand them that.
Yeah.
And instead of asking like, should you be having caffeine? Should you be having all this sugar? What if that person has tachycardia and they shouldn't be having caffeine? But obviously that's not the role of the person handing over the coffee, but that's my role as advisor to be like, whoa. Because someone will get really excited about an idea, come to me. And once I start to piece it together, it's like, yeah, what you're coming to me excited about, your friend was excited about it because he had a completely different purpose. It's kind of like being on a car lot where there's every car that's ever been made in existence available. And you ask the car salesman, what's your best car? If that's all you ask and that's all he answers, he's going to show you his favorite car, whether you like it or not. So like he might be like, this is the actually funny story. I bumped into a guy who actually owns the James Bond car from Casino Royale a bit ago. Yeah, there's only like 11 in North America, and he has one in his garage. It was just crazy. Anyways, so it's a Aston Martin. So imagine that you go to the dealership and the car dealer's favorite car is an Aston Martin, and he's like, and the one from Casino Royale, he's like, this is the best car, and you're like, cool. I trust this car salesman. He's going to give me the right car. Away we go. And then like you're getting in the car, you're turning the key or whatever. It's probably a remote start, and start to go. And then the guy asks at the last second, well, where are you going? And you're like, oh, I'm going to go on a off-road trip through the Rockies.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, this is not the best car.
Yeah.
But if all you do is go and ask for the best car, so that's another big thing I believe is the role of every advisor, is to look for their own biases. And to help do what they can to not bring those to the table or help like diminish them. So I'll talk to other advisors. I'll talk to specialists. Like before I place any policy, any large policy, I will run it by my specialist. I'll run it by even other advisors I trust to be like, have I not thought of something, or am I bringing my, and I've identified literally 1 or 2 other advisors that I trust enough to be like, Galen, you should do it. You should consider this different way. You should consider so it's like technical, from a technical standpoint, from a strategy standpoint. So absolutely, it's important. Just like you said, like she may have gone to the table with a specific intent, or she said this to the advisor, and whether the advisor took the time to figure out whether that's the best way to do it, we don't know, right? There's no way to know right now. But yeah, there is, if like I work hard on getting these biases out. I follow a very specific process of asking people questions to not influence what they want to get. But the good news is the way I structure things, it's so flexible. I make it basically the most flexible policy that I can possibly structure. So it helps a bit to become a bit of a like it makes it more easy to set up for people because it is so flexible, so that someone's not stuck in one thing if they want to change it down the line.
Cool. So what are the things, like, if let's say somebody came to you, let's pretend I'm a client, right? Or a prospect who's interested in whole life policy. And I tell you that, hey, I want to utilize the cash value in this policy to leverage and be able to take policy loans against it and be able to buy real estate. I have a guy, for instance, Mike Wolf, who I've done a lot of videos on the channel with, and he lives in Calgary, Canada, and he does real estate investing, but he does turnkey properties in Atlanta, Georgia. So what he does is he basically has a turnkey system. He buys properties 30, 40, 50 at a time and resells them. And so he goes to a lot of Canadians and says, hey, would you like to invest in the United States? And so, like, let's say I want to take part of that program and I wanted to get to $120,000 liquid fast, and I had $30,000 a year to put into a policy. What are the things that I need to take into consideration? And, how do you design that up there to accomplish that goal quickly, or as quickly as possible? Because obviously it's going to be limited based on the capacity that I have to put cash into it.
Oh, of course. Yeah. No, that's a good question. And I can definitely dive into that. Like if someone comes with a specific thing. So I'll actually bring up I forgot to get permission from you to share, to draw on my,
here.
my PowerPoint here. But yeah, no, I mean, definitely, certainly if someone comes to me with that very specific idea, obviously the first question is going to be, what's the ultimate goal at the end of the day? Is it to no longer worry about money? Is it to have passive income? Like, what's the ultimate goal and why is that important? Like, I would have that conversation first. We won't necessarily dive into that, but once that person has really explained to me, like, once someone can really like describe in depth to me what they're going to see and feel about the way their situation is, that it's going to be better in the future than it is now, then I will dive into the level of, product and strategy.
Nice.
So I'd have that first, but then
Okay.
once I know that, okay, the ultimate goal is, lots of cash value, access, flexibility, then I will look at designing it this way. So you can see my, my screen, yeah. So when it comes to policies, really one is, one of the big things is just like what we're talking about is cash, accumulation. So that's one thing that can be structured in a way that it's more flexible. One is length of payments. How many years of payments are we going to do? So I'll say years payments, and years payments, and then the third one would be access. Like, how are we going to get at this policy? So I'll talk about the first, or actually, instead of access, I'm going to talk about premium, because that's actually, I would say, a little bit, access is fairly universal. I'm going to talk about premium, premium flexibility, because that's one of the things that I know that, some people who criticize this approach, they're like, well, it's really inflexible, but you can make it in a way that it's actually quite flexible. So what we'll talk about is cash accumulation. So first thing I do is, when I sit down with someone, and most people end up in this bucket, like most people end up in the desire. If I've got someone who's got a medium term need for life insurance, like I do, like, for example, my kids are still young. My wife depends on my income to keep the house, everything going, like for her to pursue her business. If I lost my income, she'd probably have to go and get a job she hates to be able to make up for it, because her business is still growing. So I have a lot of term insurance needs. So I have a lot of term insurance to take care of the next 20 years of my life. But on the whole life side, it's like, that's for an estate planning thing, it's long term, but for cash, it's short term. So, so let's say the dollar of premium that goes in, I structure it such that as much of that dollar as humanly possible goes to growth in the early years, and as little as possible goes to death benefit in the early years.
So can I ask you a question on that?
Yeah, sure.
So in the United States, we have what we call, like, we term it like a 90-10 policy, or a 80-20 policy, or 70-30, or 60-40, where it's like, and we do paid up additions. Do you do paid up additions? Did we talk about that? You do. So, you do a 90-10 base, cash value would be 90%, 10% base, do paid up additions. You could supplement it with a term rider to raise the level higher. So in the United States, it doesn't become what we call a MEC. So I don't know how that works with you guys as far as this, if you have a 7-pay test, or like, I'm throwing out lingo terms. I don't know if they're relevant to you, but
sounds like it.
So like, how do you, when you look at the growth and death benefit, do you have those kind of, I don't know, best practices or standards? Like, okay, if you want to do that, you can structure it to be a 90-10 base, assuming your health and all that stuff is in good shape, or is it a little more whimsical and open-ended?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we definitely don't have as like, defined like 90-10 or 80-20 or anything like that. It's much more of a, it's a calc. And I don't know if MEC is part of it, but it's basically that line that you can't cross in life insurance. Is that what that is? Or
yeah. It's basically like, if you cross that line, like the government in the United States basically says, based on your age, it's a sliding algorithm.
Yes.
Essentially, but it's basically saying, based on your age, your health rating, and your policy amount, like, you can only put so much money in. You have to have a certain amount of insurance based on the amount of money you're putting in the policy. If you go over the cash with a certain amount of insurance, then it becomes a MEC contract. And they do what they call 7-pay test. So it has to be out 7 years, look out from the beginning, to be able to do that. So a lot of companies have gotten really creative by doing like 7-year term riders on these policies to allow people to jam money in. And so they get a massive death benefit at the front, and then they can put cash in, but then after 7 years, the term rider drops off. And sometimes, I mean, there are a lot of variables. Sometimes the premium drops. Sometimes, you have to get a little bit more creative. Sometimes you got to go further out than 7 years. Sometimes,
for sure.
whatever.
Yeah. So It sounds similar in the sense of, like, if we have the same line in Canada, right? Like if it crosses this line, it's no longer considered insurance; it's considered investment, and then it
Yeah.
causes problems from a tax standpoint.
Yep.
I mean, look. So when I was getting my life license, I remember the guy who was training us was like, "Don't dare cross that line," and I was like, terrified of crossing this line. I was like, but then I realized, like, no, like my software will not allow me to, at
Right.
least in my, like, it won't allow me to cross the line. Like we get as close to the line as possible, but it's not like something
Mhm.
I have to monitor. Like I was
Yeah.
terrified of, like, oh, this is something I'm gonna have to, it's gonna keep me up at night, or my client's crossing the line. And it's like, no, actually it's not. It's not, it
So
doesn't work like that.
awesome.
So yeah, so I mean, when it comes to 90/10 and everything like that, usually what I do is, like, I click on a button and I'm like, today, if this client does this, how much are they allowed to put towards cash value? How much are they allowed to put towards death benefit? And what I will say is that I talked about biases and, like, how to help with, like how to not bring as many to the table. A lot of advisors out there don't know about this option to pump more cash value into the policy. And since the tax laws changed in 2017, it's hard if you don't do this. The policies created in 2018 post 2017 versus before, if someone doesn't get in there and tweak it, they're not going to look as good, because that line changed. Like that line that you're allowed to cross got lower, so it's harder to put money
Mhm.
into it. But luckily they gave us a lot of, like I said, a lot of flexibility to change it, to continue
Okay.
to do it. So
Cool.
that's the one thing, that's the first kind of red flag, is like, if the advisor does not take into consideration the fact that you want to pump more cash value into it than the default. Because if you don't
Mhm.
press the button, it's just the default, which isn't as much as it could be. As far as 90/10 goes, and all that, I'd say that it's more like, off the top of my head, it's definitely not that drastic. I'd say most people, it's like a 40/60, I'd say, when we do it. When
Okay.
I hit that button, I'd say approximately, but each client's different. But
Mhm.
that's what I do, is I click the button. I'm like, what's the maximum I can put towards growth in this situation? Now, the cash accumulation conversation affects the years of payments. So
Mhm.
what I will say is, like, if an advisor is just biased towards what they've always done, they'll typically just do default accumulation. And a lot of advisors really like the idea of what's called a 20 pay once upon a time, which, or I
Oh,
mean, it's still called
yeah.
that,
Yeah,
but it's
yeah.
like, you're going to pay for 20 years, and after 20 years, you're done paying, and you can't pay anymore. What I don't like about that, and because I'm a student of history and I've talked to a lot of advisors who've been around for a long time, a
Yeah.
lot of people, when they get to that year 20, they don't want to stop.
Yeah, they wanna keep going.
They want to keep going. They're like, well, I've saved all this money, I've got all these taxes, I want to keep putting money into this.
Well,
But a lot of advisors sold it with the idea of, you're not going to have to do this forever. Like,
yeah.
you're only going to have to do this for 20 years. And it added a certain level of comfort, but there's a better way to do it to solve that problem.
Well, and they sell it with that level of comfort because when they're selling it, the people don't understand fully what they're getting into. But then when they fully experience it and they get 20 years out and they realize, like, holy crap, this is like the most efficient financial vehicle 20 years in that I'm ever going to be able to find. And the option of going and buying a new one and starting over just makes no sense if you have the ability to just continue this one thing.
Absolutely. So I'd say 20 is like the biased kind of default that people do, and the way that I
Mhm.
structure it. And so when you max out the cash accumulation, it also tends to shorten the number of years it's going to take of contractual payments before you can stop. So
Okay.
what I do with my clients is I basically say, if you want to pay this for the rest of your life, you can. Like, it's pay to 100. I say, like, so age, this is age. So I might meet someone who's, I don't know, in their 30s or 40s or whatever age. I'm going to say, look, if you need to, and if it, because I, and it makes sense, you can pay this until you're 100, because I meet a lot of people who do the 20 pay and at age 60 wish they could keep going, and they can't. And maybe now like you said, like, to take on a new policy at that age doesn't make as much sense. Potentially, sometimes it still makes a lot of sense if there's a lot of estate planning needs. I've
Well,
had clients take on policies in their 60s because of estate planning.
okay.
But it's not as good as if they could just kept going with the same one, right?
Totally.
So what I do is we start here, that they could do it for the rest of their lives if they want to, or they could stop really early on. So, like, usually when I structure a policy, maximizing the growth of the policy, we're usually looking at a I'll say, to be on the safe side, 7 to 10 year window where
Okay.
they could stop paying.
Okay.
And people look at that and they're like, I mean, I really don't know why. I'm trying to think. Like, the only reason I wouldn't do this is if someone said to me, Galen, I know for a fact I'm going to want to do this forever. I know for a fact I'm never going to access it. I only want this for estate planning. Then maybe I would structure it differently. But even then, the flexibility of being able to stop if you absolutely need to is pretty attractive to me.
And
When,
do they Do
Yeah,
they do that in Canada through what we call RPUs in the United States, reduced paid up? Like,
right.
is that where you're going with it, or is it something?
Um, I mean, that option exists. Really, it's just the fact it's the premium vacation. You can do reduced paid up. You can do premium
You can.
vacation. So
Okay.
like if I max out the cash value in a policy, you know, if the premium's big enough and all that, then someone can stop paying in year 7 to 10. The policy just starts paying for itself.
Okay.
Or you can do reduced paid up. Like you have
So the
options.
dividends inside the policy
Yep.
basically covering the premium.
Yeah, so I mean the growth slows down and all that, but you know, I just look at it as my one of my biggest roles in my client's life is to hedge bets against what can go wrong
Oh,
potentially.
sure.
And
Totally.
so I say, look, you know, if something happens in your life and you can't keep this going, or it doesn't make as much sense, if something changes in your life, then you're going to have the
Mhm.
ability to stop this much
Mhm.
earlier. And 7 years actually goes by really fast for people. So like I've been doing mine for 7 years now because I've been
If
in it.
you've ever had kids, you know what we mean by that. I have a 9-year-old daughter. I'm like, whoa, how did she get 9? That's
Yeah, my
crazy.
daughter's 9 as well. It goes by fast. So yeah, 7 years is fast.
The blur.
Yeah, and I mean, so what I will say is like the default options typically are so one of the ways they have made it more flexible is you can do 10-year, 20-year, 30-year, or 100. So they've made it to age 100. I typically, like I said, I start here, but then I structure it such that the person could stop much earlier
Gotcha.
than otherwise, or keep going. Like they just have tons of flexibility, which is what I really see the value of that. Having done this for a number of years, even if someone swears up and down that they don't want that necessarily, I run the numbers, and a lot of times it still just makes sense to do it. Like it doesn't necessarily make sense not to do this, so I just do it. And, you
Okay.
know, they don't lose anything by setting it up this way.
Awesome.
And the third thing is the premium. I'll make a new slide because I'm running out of room here a little bit. This is another thing that a lot of like the default, if someone's structures it in a way that just they don't you know, take an active role in structuring it. The default is like, and I'll just use a round number of a premium. Let's say it's a $20,000 a year premium. If an advisor isn't structuring it any differently up front, that's going to be the premium every year, no matter what. Like 20,000 this year, next year, and so on. I structure it such that if a client needs to, they could drop that premium. Usually, like rough numbers, if it's a 20,000, this is just like picking an example, they
Mhm.
could probably drop it to like the 10 range if they needed to for a year or two. And then if they had to do that for, and then bring it back up to the 20 or keep it to 10. Like, and so I just like that idea of my clients having that flexibility. If they
When
need to,
if they
they can
drop
actually.
if they drop down to 10 for 5 years, let's say, out of from the 20, can they then backload that 50,000 that they missed? Can they like dump it in later?
No, they don't save that up. They have to, they've got a certain number of years depending on how it's structured where they have to restart that or else they lose it.
Okay.
But they could continue at 10 forever if they want to. The
Okay.
cash value, the cash growth will, you know, the investment side of it will grow more slowly.
Okay.
But that's the other thing that I do is flexibility on premium. And
Cool.
again, it's just win-win-win. When like I've run when I do these for clients, I will run easily 30 illustrations sometimes
Mhm.
and I'll run comparisons across 4 different types of them. Like I will run the numbers until I'm happy with what we've ended up with. And at the end of the day though, even after I run all these numbers and talk to my specialists and talk to other advisors, we
Yeah.
usually get to the point where they are basically, when you look at the flexibility of this, they've got the maximum flexibility of how much money is accumulating, like the maximum amount of cash is accumulating inside of the policy. They've got the maximum amount of flexibility of keeping this going for until they're 100 years old or stopping much earlier. And they've got the maximum flexibility of dropping the premium lower than where they started if they need to.
It's awesome. That's great. So what else? I mean, I mean, it seems that, I mean, to me, I mean, it's hard for me because like I know this stuff so well. So it's what other questions do you think you know, people would have? Like, what do you have? I guess what kind of blind spots do you see from people? Because to me, I think it's important that people understand like what are the right questions to ask and be contemplating yourself before talking to an advisor. And of
Oh
course,
yeah.
they could reach out to you or whatever. And
Yeah, yeah.
I would encourage anybody to reach out to you if you're in Canada. But at the same time, I'm a big believer in like prepping ahead of time before going to talk to any financial advisor, because otherwise you'll end up like this lady I talked to earlier
Yeah,
today.
for sure. Yeah, no, I'd say one of the big questions would be is, like, what's a premium, what's a reasonable premium? First off, I guess I'd say is like, what's the big plan? Like, ask yourself, where does this fit into everything else? Like most
Mhm.
of my clients, this is not the only thing they're doing. They have other investments, they have potentially other properties. Like it's not just
Sure.
this, it's like, where does it fit in? Because I
Yeah.
have had people come to me and they want to kind of put all their money in this, and they want to start
Mhm.
like today, and they've come off of maybe they're in a Facebook group where people are really pushing this, and
People are fired up.
yeah, and I say like, let's slow down. Let's look at what makes sense, because they hear things like tax deferred and tax free growth and tax free access, and they get really excited about it. And it's like, well, we have to make sure it makes sense as part of the big plan. And part of the big plan would be like, what's a reasonable yearly deposit? I'd say that's a big one. Like, what can you
Mhm.
pull off every year reasonably going forward?
Yeah,
Um,
with
the
minimal
next
stress.
Yeah, exactly. Because,
Yeah.
99% of my clients do this as a yearly, they write a check once a year for this.
Yep.
It's usually
Yep.
just what makes sense for them. That's
Yep.
how I do it for myself. And
Yep.
when that thing rolls around, I mean, like, I'm like, okay, like we got to make sure we're able to do this. Like,
Yeah,
we've
if
been
you got
doing
to
this for,
stroke a $30,000 check, that better be comfortable for you. And if it's not, like whatever, whether it's a $5,000 or 10,000 or 30,000 or $200,000 check, like you better be ready to do it.
absolutely. And so that's what I really help with. I've had people come in, who wanted to do one that was much bigger than I thought that they could reasonably afford,
Okay.
because they really liked the idea of getting all the benefits. And I said, well, you're not going to be super happy with this if you run out of money in year 10. Like, yes, you're going to have this going for you, but like, so I've had people kind of look at the big picture, figure out what's a reasonable yearly deposit. What's the final goal with it? We talked about that. Is it early access? Is it retirement supplement? Is
Mm-hmm.
it estate planning?
Yeah.
These are kind of the big three.
Yep.
And then where are you going to hold it? If you have a corporation, it's going to like where hold it. If you have a corporation, almost always
Mhm.
makes sense to hold it inside of a corporation. If you
Totally.
don't have a corporation, it's not a problem. Like I do this for a lot of people who don't have corporations, but for a corporation, it makes sense almost always to
Okay.
hold it. And if there is a corporation involved, have to make sure you've structured the beneficiaries properly, have to make sure that it forms, you have to make sure that you're accounting for it during your yearly taxes. You don't have to pay any taxes, but you just have to, it's a corporate asset. And then
Mm.
it also has to be reflected, the estate, or sorry, the corporation becomes the beneficiary. So
Mm.
then the corporate will has to take into account where the money's going to go. So if you have a corporation, you should definitely, it's not actually technically, if any lawyers watching, they're going to be mad I called it a corporate will. It's technically called a dual will. It's a will that's just for the corporation.
Okay.
Once a corporation starts to have good assets inside of it, should probably set up a will. What other questions? I guess this is about it. I mean,
Okay.
how's it form part of the big plan? What can you pull off reasonably every year? What's the final goal? Where are you going to hold it? And as a side, like it just as an aside, because my corporate clients, I'm always like, all right, let's get that corporate will going or that dual will going, because
That's awesome.
otherwise it can be problems if there's not one of those set up.
Well, that's great, man. Well, at the end of the day, I mean, like this is why I'm doing these videos with you instead of somebody else in Canada, because one of the biggest things for me in any kind of well, all the investment advice and business advice and marriage advice and all the things that I do on my channel, it's really starting with the end in mind and asking the right questions and really figuring out, is what I am looking to do going to get me closer to where I want to go. And sadly, too many financial people are just product pushing, widget selling. To me, the financial system is broken, in the way that the whole thing is kind of put together and the way that advisors are handing out advice and structuring people's finances and the way they get compensated and all these different things. And so I really encourage anybody, whether you decide to reach out to Galen, whether, anything else, like just make sure that you're completely clear on what your objectives are. And if you have questions about like how those objectives maybe fit into your plan, because like it's hard to see the forest through the trees sometimes when you're doing it for yourself, I would 1000% recommend, especially if you're in Canada, reaching out to Galen. And, you could tell he's pretty low key. I think you get a lot of value and benefit out of a conversation with him one way or the other. So anything else from you, bud?
No, absolutely. I really appreciate it. And that's a big part of it. I mean, I think that, just like we said, like when I started as an advisor, I would get excited. We had all these product specialists come in, and like each one
Yeah.
was like, okay, do group benefits. Group benefits are amazing. Do mortgages. Mortgages are amazing. Do this, do that.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
can get really pulled in lots of different directions. And so I think what happens with a lot of advisors is they just they gravitate towards like one thing, or they gravitate towards the simplest version of a thing. And I don't blame them 100% because it is tough. Like if anyone out there is an entrepreneur, like I am a self-employed entrepreneur who
Sure.
is a financial planner. I have zero paycheck. I have zero, like my paycheck varies wildly month from month, like any entrepreneur. And
Yep.
so when someone starts out, I can see how difficult it can be to balance, like I need to make money with I need to do what's right. And I think it's a
Yeah.
tough spot that advisors are put in.
Mhm.
And I think that if someone cannot find their way through that, they probably just end up kind of doing the same thing forever. And there's a lot of things out there teaching us different sales techniques and all that. And like I'm really happy I'm past that part of my like development where I don't
Sure.
obsess over how I'm going to say something, or I don't obsess over the question I'm going to ask. Like I just sit with people and I jam out on what they want and what they want to achieve, and I help them figure out what they're going to like, what's going to get them there the fastest, and what's going to fit their plan. So
Beautiful.
just to address that quickly. So, I mean, the biggest thing is to find someone you trust, because when it's not even the product, like the product, yes, is a vehicle, but it's like
Yeah.
the advisor is the
Mhm.
thing that you are hiring a person to be a part of your life to help you reach your deepest desire financially in life. Like it's got to be a person you trust. It's got to be a person who's competent, and yeah, and it can be hard from the outside to know how to gauge that. And
For
I
sure.
think that what's happened, and then my last thing I'll say, certainly on investing side, is I think it's so hard to gauge that what people
Yeah.
have defaulted to is what's the cheapest advice I can get, or like what's the cheapest thing I can get, when in fact, like in life, I know very few people who base all their decisions on what's the cheapest. Like I don't know a
Mm.
lot of people who own the house they own because it's the cheapest, the car they own the cheapest, they don't go to the dentist they go to because it's the cheapest, or the accountant or the lawyer or so on. But I think that people are so afraid of getting bad advice or getting into the mixed up with the wrong stuff, that they're like, you know what, at least I'm getting cheap stuff. And I maybe they don't know whether it fits a plan or not. But I just encourage people to, anyone who's watching this is probably the kind of person that's doing their own research, digging
Yeah.
deep,
Totally.
getting informed, which absolutely I believe in, people being informed and empowered when
Yeah.
they go to make decisions and when they go to engage with a financial planner.
Cool, man. I love it. Well, thanks for being here. And so, guys, if you found value in this, go ahead and click that subscribe button. Absolutely share this. We're starting to do a lot of Canadian content with Galen. Kind of share it with people, in Canada who maybe haven't been exposed to this information or channel yet. Hit the subscribe button, click the bell. That way you get notified every time we launch a new video. And yeah, I mean, we look forward to seeing you next week on the same time, same place. And we'll see you then. Until then, have a blessed, inspirational day. Take care.